Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi isanin ila yawmiddin wa ba'd. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha haqqa tuqatihi wa la tamutunna illa wa antum muslimun. My dear brothers and sisters in Islam, as you may remember, last week we were exploring how the region of Khaybar transitioned from being a persistent threat to becoming a cornerstone of stability and prosperity for the Muslim state. And we reflected on the importance of not only having a strategy, but combining that with bravery as modeled by the Prophet ﷺ and his great companions, whose steadfast reliance on Allah and boldness in battle turned the tide in their favor. Through the Prophet's leadership, ﷺ, the Muslim army was able to subdue the treacherous tribes of Khaybar, not only securing the state, but also striking a pivotal deal that would provide the Muslim community with a continuous surplus of resources. The Prophet's strategy in battle was not only brilliant, but also deeply compassionate. He sought to minimize casualties wherever possible. His willingness to accept the terms proposed by the Jewish tribes themselves, allowing them to remain in Khaybar in exchange for 50% of their annual harvest, avoided mass displacement of these communities while ensuring stability. The agreement marked a significant shift in regional power dynamics, solidifying the Muslim community as now being the leading force as opposed to the tribes of Ghatafan in that region. While things were going relatively positive, it didn't mean it was over. Amidst this progress, there remained instances of betrayal and hostility, which reminds us of the ever-present challenges of leadership, trust, and conflict resolution. So today, we're going to reflect a little bit on such incidents. One in particular, the poisoning of the Prophet ﷺ by one of the women of Khaybar. And we'll learn some of the profound lessons that scenario offers on the dangers of betrayal and the role of patience and wisdom in resolving conflict. After the terms were agreed upon, essentially, a ceasefire was struck between the two groups. Zainab bint al-Harith, the wife of Salam ibn Mishkam, who was killed in action, by the way, the husband, she prepared and presented the Prophet ﷺ with a roasted lamb. And before serving him, she inquired as to which part of the lamb was his favorite. And she was told that he preferred the shoulder of the lamb. And so she poisoned the entire lamb, but concentrated the poison in that area of the animal. Presenting it to him, this was an act of treachery and betrayal. When she brought it to the Prophet ﷺ, he took the shoulder, he bit a small piece of it, and quickly spat it out before swallowing. This was a miraculous event. He was informed by the bone itself that the meat had been poisoned. Sitting right next to him was one of his great companions, Bishr ibn Bara. He was one of the Ansari, in fact, the leader of the Ansar. He was the one that led the Muslims of the Yathrib to the second pledge of Aqaba. He was there with the Prophet ﷺ, had also bitten into the lamb and was unable to spit out what he began to eat. He was certainly affected by that poisoned lamb. The Prophet ﷺ then called for Zainab, the woman that served them the lamb, and asked her why she poisoned the food. He asked her, "Did you poison the shoulder?" And she said, "Who told you?" He replied, "The shoulder itself informed me." And she said, "Yes." He then asked her what persuaded her to do such a thing. And she said, "You killed my father, my uncle, and my husband," meaning they were killed in battle. This was the killed in action. You took from my people what you took. And so I said to myself, if he's truly a prophet, then he'll be informed of the poison. But if he's some type of king, then I'll relieve myself and my people of him. She wanted to kill him. And the result of her actions didn't lead to the immediate death of the Prophet ﷺ as intended, but it certainly did for Bishr. Some reports suggest that Bishr died shortly thereafter, after eating the poisoned piece of lamb. Right then and there, it was moments that these reports suggest that he passed away. Others suggest that the poisoning incapacitated him for about a year, unable to move, lying in bed, couldn't even roll over without assistance until eventually he passed away. The poison did have a lasting impact on the Prophet ﷺ. It was reported that he complained about it on numerous occasions until eventually passing away approximately 4 years after this incident. And even on his deathbed, he confessed to his wife Aisha that the poisoning at Khaybar was now catching up with him, causing him great discomfort and likely a reason for his demise. Many of the Muslims, because of that, including the likes of the companion Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhum, believed that the Prophet ﷺ passed away as a martyr, having been killed by that poisoning. And this is in addition to the great honor that Allah had bestowed upon him through prophethood. So not only a prophet and a messenger, but a martyr. And this right here, this point right here, the perception that we have of our Prophet ﷺ and his poisoning in passing poses a tremendous dilemma for the enemies of the faithful. They think that they can submit the believer through fear of death because they cling to life in desperation. They believe others do as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Baqarah, وَلَتَجِدَنَّهُمْ أَحْرَصَ النَّاسِ عَلَى حَيَاتٍ وَمِنَ الَّذِينَ أَشْرَكُوا يَوَدُّ أَحَدُهُمْ لَوْ يُعَمَّرُ أَلْفَ سَنَةٍ. He says, you will surely find them clinging to life more eagerly than any other people, even more than the polytheists, the idol worshippers. Each one of them wishes to live 1,000 years. This is Surah Al-Baqarah, verse number 96. And I would urge you to read from verse number 92 until 96 or so to learn more about who Allah is referring to specifically here. You understand my meaning. And because they, the enemies of the faithful, fear death in such a way, and they fear dying, they tend to project these fears on everyone else, thinking that they will surrender through the threat of death. While the people of faith, the believers, appreciate life and enjoy its many blessings, they also embrace the reality of their demise. كُلُّ نَفْسٍ ذَائِقَةُ الْمَوْتِ. Every soul will taste death, and they are certain that nothing will strike them except by Allah's will, and therefore await their meeting with Him. قُلْ لَنْ يُصِيبَنَا إِلَّا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَنَا هُوَ مَوْلَانَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, say, commanding the faithful, nothing will ever befall us. لَنْ يُصِيبَنَا إِلَّا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَنَا. Nothing will afflict us except that Allah has decreed it. هُوَ مَوْلَانَا. Allah is our provider, our protector. وَعَلَى اللَّهِ فَلْيَتَوَكَّلِ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. He says, so upon Allah the believers placed their trust. And then when it comes to those that are killed in His cause, as people of faith, we don't even believe they're dead. So the threat of death and dying is totally misplaced. وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ قُتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتًا بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ يُرْزَقُونَ. Never think of those martyred in the cause of Allah as dead. In fact, they are alive with their Lord well provided for. This is Surah Al-Imran, verse number 169. And while there's a number of lessons, there's many lessons that are worth learning to live a life free of fear here in this point, I want to reflect on another point, and that's the dangers of betrayal and treachery. Betrayal and treachery can have devastating effects on not only individuals but societies as a whole. They erode trust, they foster suspicion, they strain relationships, making positive interactions and cooperation difficult at best and impossible at worst. For those affected by betrayal and treachery, the emotional toll can include sadness, anger, and a deep sense of disappointment. And on a broader scale, betrayal weakens social bonds, destabilizes communities, and may even lead to increased crime and violence as individuals seek revenge or justice for perceived wrongs. Ultimately, these actions, they undermine the health, stability, and cohesion of a society. The Jewish tribes of Khaybar, many of them had already breached their earlier treaties with the Muslims. Their treachery now led to this confrontation. And after an agreement was struck, Zaynab bint al-Harith, attempting to assassinate the Prophet ﷺ, only exacerbated the situation, making it much worse than it already was. And it could have had immediate and devastating consequences, not only for herself, but for all the people of Khaybar. Such an act of betrayal had the potential to shatter any remaining trust between the Muslim state and those Jewish tribes. It could have led to widespread retaliation, mass displacement, or the complete annihilation of the entire community. And this highlights the societal dangers of betrayal. It breeds mistrust, incites hostility, and disrupts any chance for peaceful coexistence. And in modern times, the betrayal of treaties and agreements has repeatedly proven to be a major obstacle to peaceful coexistence between nations, often escalating conflicts and perpetuating cycles of violence. And a striking example of this is the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine, where the breach of agreements has occurred countless times, undermining prospects for peace. Over the years, numerous terms of international treaties have been violated, not only in Palestine, but in the region. Many of you may remember the Oslo Accords, which aimed to establish mutual recognition and pave the way to a two-state solution. That was breached almost immediately. Now it's an impossibility. Continuous expansion of illegal settlements in the West Bank, the annexation of Palestinian land, and the frequent violation of agreed-upon ceasefires have deepened mistrust and exacerbated tensions between both sides. These breaches not only erode trust, but also strip away the possibility of meaningful dialogue, replacing it with resentment and hostility. They devastate Palestinian communities, disrupt livelihoods, and perpetuate a sense of injustice that fuels further instability. Just as betrayal sowed seeds of discord among the people of Khaybar, the failure to honor commitments in modern conflicts destabilizes entire regions and ensures that peace remains an ever elusive goal. Such betrayals, like those seen in Khaybar, they often lead to long-term consequences. While the Prophet ﷺ initially allowed the Jewish tribes of Khaybar to remain in the region, despite the assassination attempt, the poisoning, the murder of his companion, despite that, they continued to breach their trust, ultimately making coexistence unsustainable. The Prophet ﷺ, despite his patience and fairness, the continued acts of deception, hiding of their wealth, as I mentioned previously, and conspiring with external forces eroded any possibility of maintaining peace and stability. And so because of this ongoing betrayal, the groundwork for eventual eviction was laid. And this happened during the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab while he was serving in office as Amir al-Mu'mineen. He expelled the Jewish tribes of Khaybar from the Arabian Peninsula altogether, which was a right the Prophet retained during that agreement. He allowed them to stay there if they would adhere to peace, but retained the right to send them packing if it were broken. Omar's decision was not born out of prejudice, but out of necessity to preserve the integrity and security of the Muslim state, which could no longer tolerate persistent threats posed by those unwilling to honor agreements. The story of Khaybar, it stands as a profound lesson on the importance of trust and the far-reaching consequences of betrayal. We've come to understand from this story and the many examples we've seen throughout history that where treachery persists, stability cannot endure. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله والحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه كما يحب ربنا ويرضى ونصلي ونسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Brothers and sisters, as we conclude this chapter in the Prophet's biography, I want to reflect on one more lesson. And that is the Prophet's remarkable response to Zainab's treachery. Her actions were a clear betrayal of the agreement. But the Prophet ﷺ demonstrated profound emotional resilience and clarity in his response. Zainab's actions, while certainly treacherous, stemmed from deep pain and fear. Her actions were driven by pain and fear, perhaps hatred, emotions that often drive people to harmful actions. The Prophet ﷺ, in the face of such emotional outbursts, did not allow her to dictate the course of events. He understood that reacting impulsively or emotionally would not serve justice, nor would it uphold the broader principles of Islam. Instead, he questioned her calmly to understand her motives, and after deliberation, he forgave her. Even with the companions insisting that he take her to task, he let her off the hook. And it's only when the effects of the poison led to the death of his companions that he took further action. His companion, when he passed away, that's when the Prophet ﷺ took further action, ensuring that justice was served without excess or retaliation. And this response of the Prophet ﷺ aligns with the principle we find in the Quran when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا يَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ شَنَآنُ قَوْمٍ عَلَىٰ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا اعْدِلُوا هُوَ أَقْرَبُ لِلتَّقْوَى. This is Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse number 8, what reads, and do not let the hatred of a people prevent you from being just. Be just. There is something that, of course, is nearer to righteousness. Do not let the hatred and emotion, a feeling that you have, prevent you from being just. And the Prophet ﷺ displayed this quality of leadership. This is a quality that is pointed out by Edwin Friedman. It's a book that I've enjoyed over the years. Edwin Friedman, actually an American ordained rabbi. That's right, I read some of that stuff from time to time. This was actually a great book. It's entitled A Failure of Nerve. The ability, he talks about, to remain differentiated or emotionally unmeshed in the face of conflict is absolutely foundational in its resolution. Friedman warns that allowing the most emotionally reactive individual to control the pace or terms of a situation leads to further chaos and escalation. To allow the most emotionally unsophisticated person to dictate terms and pace only leads to further chaos. The more sophisticated, wise individual has to set the pace and the tone. They cannot be reactive, feeding off the negative energy of the other party. The Prophet ﷺ exemplified this in the face of Zainab's rather impulsive act that could have destabilized the agreement that he struck with Khaybar, or it could have provoked an emotional chain reaction with his community. Instead, the Prophet ﷺ maintained clarity, patience, and control. prioritizing the long-term stability of the Muslim state over immediate retaliation. The Prophet ﷺ understood that disengaging emotionally from reactive individuals while remaining steadfast in justice prevents conflicts from escalating unnecessarily. By staying centered and deliberative, he modeled the very essence of wisdom and restraint. And that is what he meant when he said, "At-ta'anni min Allah wal-ajalatu min ash-shaytan." That deliberation is to proceed slowly, take things slowly, to put thought into things is from Allah, and haste is from shaitan. Haste is often out of an emotional reaction. And the lessons here, they're profound. Whether we're resolving conflicts within our families, that's right, it doesn't have to be state level, nation level problems. It can be right there in your household, and you have to remain emotionally unmeshed when someone is having a volatile response. If you think about it for a moment, and this happens often, you're in an argument with your spouse, you're flying off the handle, becoming very loud. If you simply try and match that energy, who's going to be the louder one? Who's going to be the one that uses worse language, stronger names to call, worse insults? Just matching that energy, blow for blow, trying to topple the other one through this type of emotional reaction, it never gets anywhere. It only delivers more chaos and problems down the road. It doesn't have to be nation-level problems, but problems within our household have to be managed and resolved in the same way. Also, the tensions that you might find in the workplace, navigating the challenges that present themselves in our communities. The key to success lies in maintaining emotional composure and exercising wisdom. Letting emotions dictate decisions often leads to rashness and greater harm, while patience, calm, deliberation, and adherence to principles of our faith pave the way to just and lasting solutions. As we strive to emulate the Prophet's example, we have to remember the importance of staying rooted in our faith, acting with integrity, and not allowing reactive individuals or circumstances to disrupt our principles. By cultivating emotional resilience, justice, and wisdom in all aspects of our lives, we will continue to strengthen and stabilize our community just as the Prophet ﷺ did for his. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us success in this life and in the next, to protect us from those who seek to harm us, to grant relief from those who are suffering around the world from various types and forms of injustice or otherwise. اللهم يسر ولا تعسر وتمم بالخير وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وآخر دعوانا الحمد